And so another part of this, I mean, we're asked the question, is putting a boundary on yourself to create safety and protection within the relationship, is that biblical? So yes, it is biblical. Boundaries are not just a good idea, they're a God idea. The second part of that is, what about verses that seem to sort of go against that? And one of them that I really had to wrestle through is the fact that Jesus laid his life down. Yeah. And, and the Bible even says we are to lay our life down, even for a friend. So as I was studying this, though, it occurred to me, Jesus did not lay his life down to enable bad behavior or sin to continue. Right. Jesus laid his one life down for the sake of a high and holy purpose. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people will ask us to lay our life down to enable sin that should not be enabled, or to try to force us to tolerate behaviors that should not be tolerated, or to force us to agree with unhealthy tendencies and patterns in a relationship that should not be agreed with. You see, a lot of where this tension is coming from, I've discovered in relationships, and you taught me this, Jim, health cannot bond with unhealth. And one time, if I want to show this glass of water here. Okay, see if we can get this on camera. Do you see here how water is seeking its own level? So the water on this side of the glass is seeking the same level on this side of the glass. Mm-hmm. You don't see a glass of water sitting on a flat surface and have it tilted in such a way like this. Yeah. But what have we been describing here? We've been describing when you're giving so much access and someone's not bringing the right level of responsibility to that kind of access, there's a tilt here. Yeah. And so the tension is we're trying to achieve an equilibrium in this relationship that's healthy. But if you are seeking what is healthy and the other person is refusing, unwilling, or incapable of healthy, then of course there is going to be this constant tension, and your choice at that point is either to sink down to their level of unhealth. Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Or to require parameters in place that either they need to get healthy or you will have to reduce the access lest you become as unhealthy as they do.
And as we've said, it is not arrogant to say, instead of you need to quit smoking or you need to quit doing this and stop the verbal emotional abuse, it's a big letter I am over here. And if you want to be in a relationship with me, here's what is okay with me, here's what not okay with me, and here's what I'm willing to negotiate. Because if I co-sign someone else, again, if I'm allowing them to have this access to me, when almost like anything is not a faith is sin, if I know, no, I shouldn't be doing this, and I allow people to do that, I'm constantly training them how to treat me. And we talked a long time ago that every relationship has a contract, every relationship. So I begin to say...
Even if it's an unspoken one.
Even if it's, most are unspoken, I think. So to say, people get into counseling, they do Bible studies, they get in the Word, they get discipled. And I realize that I've allowed this to go on. And when you know better, you do better. And now I know better to say, little children explain, and here's the reason why. Adults, which what we want to be as adults, inform. And to say, I am no longer okay with you talking about dirty jokes or gossiping or pick your whatever and say, or are you calling me late at night? Or are you just calling to dump all your problems? I'm no longer okay with that. So if you want to be in a relationship with me, I won't be in a relationship with someone who does this, and I need this if I'm going to be in a relationship. Now, if you kick that up to, what about divorce and how long do you do all that? That's a little nuanced and a little different, but I don't need anyone to co-sign my boundaries. And I want to say this because I know we're going to shift back to the theologian, our good doctor friend here, but I believe, I've never said this, so here we go, I've never said it to you, but I believe the road to Calvary, where Jesus died on the cross, I believe it's biblically as all get out, that the road to Calvary was paved with Jesus' boundaries, because Jesus was the most boundaried person ever. Mm-hmm. They tried to stone him and he got out of the crowd. Peter, Caesarea Philippi, you're not going to the cross. Get behind me, Satan. Mm-hmm. If you look, so all the way before he got what he said, by the way, as you know, no man takes my life, I lay it down. I've had people say, Jesus was a classic codependent. He laid his life down. No. So that whole piece is to go, the road all the way before you get to Calvary is Jesus allowing what would come in and boundarying things. Even woman, miracle at Cana, my hour's not yet come, or chill out, or I've got this, or I must be about my Father's business, at age 12 in the temple. So there were all these boundaries, but the energy was him fulfilling his mission that his Father God had called him to. It was not to say to you all, people will do that. This is my boundary. I dare you to cross it. That's not the energy of it at all.
Right. I mean, Jesus has 12 disciples. I mean, think about how many people were probably chasing after him.
They went in the club.
Let me be in of one of the 12, and there were 12. Of the 12, there are 3 that are the inner 3, and Philip gets a bad rep because he's kind of the fourth wheel. I know there's a third wheel. We'll call it the fourth wheel.
Yeah, but it's true.
And so I think again of Jesus. Like, how does Jesus pick and choose? Like, hey, on this one, Peter, James, and John, y'all are rolling with me to the Transfiguration. Sorry, Philip, you got to chill back, And so, yeah, Jesus had, but this is, again, very important. There's nothing that Jesus does without an intentionality.
I love that.
Jesus knows that the establishment of this boundary is both for the good of the disciples that stayed back. There's something for them to learn.
That's
in
so
this,
good.
simultaneously,
Yeah.
there's something unique in the life of Peter, James, and John that they're going to have to learn from this experience with me. So the boundary of whether you're in or out, or whatever that might be played out, there's a meaning for both audiences. I think there, in Jesus examples this kind of pretty perfectly because he's Jesus.
I like how you phrase that too, Jim, when you're communicating the boundary. I am no longer willing to accept. So you're not commanding that other person, you must stop this behavior, or you must stop this activity. You're saying, I'm no longer willing to give you access to bring that activity or that pattern or that behavior into a relationship with me where it is now affecting me. So you're an adult. If that person is an adult, you're an adult. You get to make your choice and I get to make mine. My choice is not that. So if you bring that into this relationship, I will have to reduce the access down to the responsibility that you are demonstrating. And I think when we're thinking through this, and now that we see, okay, boundaries are biblical. They're not means of control or manipulation. When done right, and we're talking about healthy, appropriate boundaries, it is for the sake of the relationship.
That's right.
It is for the sake of keeping the best of who you are front and center.
And the establishment of peace between people.
Yes, and the establishment of peace. So the other side of this is, okay, now that we've discovered, okay, now boundaries are a good thing. God modeled it, Jesus modeled it, and so why would we think that we shouldn't also live this out in our life? But sometimes where our boundary is going to fall apart is putting a boundary in place in a relationship could cost me something.
I think most of the time it will cost you something. I say that the reason a lot of people, I've been now convinced of this, they will not put boundaries in place and then keep the boundaries in place is grief. Because the grief, why? Because it will cost me something and I'll have to grieve that people will judge me or they will get by. They'll leave and go on with another relationship or something else. But I think the size of the boundary shows what does it cost you, at least initially. I think that's what I see.
So I want to talk about this a little bit because I think that I know that at times I struggle with people pleasing. But when I dig around, my people pleasing isn't just because I want to keep everybody happy. Sometimes my people pleasing is because I feel like I have a need that person fulfills. So my motivation on the surface is I want to keep them happy, which could look like people pleasing. But in reality, I'm actually afraid of losing what I feel like I want or need from this other person. Therefore, if I'm afraid, if I put a boundary here and now I'm risking this person being unhappy, and if they're unhappy, they may take with them the thing that I feel like I need. So a good exercise is for us to really assess, am I just really trying to keep this person happy, or am I needing something from them that I fear if I put this boundary in place, they take that away, then I may not feel okay in this world.
That's right.
And that gets into a whole nother set of considerations
Well, I want
with
to know
boundaries.
who the subject really is, because what I teach and believe on this is the number one person I'm trying to really please when I'm a people pleaser is myself. It's vampiric. I'm literally vampiric, sucking the life out of the person. See, I'm okay if you're okay. If you're okay with me, and if I'm not okay, if I don't do this for you, then maybe you'll cut me off and I lose something, because you do bring some good things to me from time to time. So when I'm people pleasing, the idea of admitting that, it's really in the end about me. I'm trying to self-regulate, and I can be okay if you're okay. And so if I say, you know what, no, that's a boundary violation. I think the more you get into boundaries, plus the Spirit of God living in us, you'll know. Stress, again, right, in a relationship, stress is when your gut says no, but your mouth says yes, or stress is when your gut says stop, but your mouth says go. It's you begin to, I think, recognize it more and more. And on the boundaries issues, biblically and otherwise, Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And it is my job to not, the other person, we say around some of the therapy community, don't take their inventory. What are they doing? Should they be doing all that? We do a little of that. But what do I need to be doing? And then to count the cost, that if I have a boundary with this person, they may write me off, they may gossip about me over here, and I may lose something, and then we're back to where we were in stages of trauma and grief and healing, is to grieve through that and say, usually I find that a good boundary will cost you something, but there is such value on the other side of that, of my life being healthy. There's a payoff, but it often takes time to get there.
Because healthy relationships appreciate healthy boundaries.
Yes.
It's in unhealthy relationships where boundaries are not respected.
Yeah.
And so maybe I am trying to get a need met in an unhealthy way or in an unhealthy relationship. And so I have to do an honest assessment of my needs. And sometimes what I've discovered is if I'm living in fear of this person walking away from me, chances are that person is the kind of person that will walk away and eventually will walk away. Right. So I could spend years suffering through chaos in a relationship, hoping to get this person to meet this need, and maybe for a while they do. But if they're eventually the kind of person that will walk away, they're going to walk away.
They'll find a reason.
And so it's better to establish what is healthy and what is not healthy, what I'm willing to accept, what I'm not willing to accept, what I have to give and what I don't have to give, in the form of putting a boundary on myself, on my decisions, guardrails, protection, so that if that relationship is going to fall apart, it's better for it to be in a situation where I've established a boundary, that person has chosen not to respect the boundary, and it takes some of the intensity of drama and trauma. And if that relationship is going to fall apart eventually, it's better for it to happen in a situation where you've declared health, so you don't get sucked into years of unhealth. And I know this is hard. But something that I've really been also challenging myself is sometimes I wrongly have a need from another person based out of a fear of what I feel God will never give me.
Boy, that's powerful. That's right, cuts to the chase.
And so I have to ask myself if this is a legitimate need, or is it a desire, So kind of separate out that. Like, I can have a desire. A desire is different than a need. So is it a legitimate need, or is this just a desire? And then the next step is this a need that is supposed to be filled by God himself? And am I placing this need on somebody else, asking them to meet this need because I'm too afraid that God won't meet it?
And that's a perfect place, just real quick, of Jeremiah 2:13 in this book. God says, my people have committed two sins. And I want us to think this in the context of relationships, both vertically with God, horizontally with people. He says, I'm just going to make it real simple. Jeremiah 2:13 is my favorite verses in the Bible as I work with people. They've committed two sins. One, they've forsaken me, the fountain of living water. I better get to the point to say, I am saying, God, you're not enough. That's getting back to Oswald Chambers, who said, I sin because I have the suspicion that God is not good. He says, they've forsaken me, the fountain of living water. But they don't just stop with that. They then dig out cisterns, broken cisterns in the ground that can hold no water. So the idea is in that cistern, we grew up in our backyard, there was a cistern. We've talked about on-site. There was a cistern there at on-site. It's old. And the idea is later they put Jeremiah into this broken cistern up to his armpits and dirty, nasty water. But the sense is, God, I don't think you're enough. You won't give me what I need in this relationship. Or if this relationship, I have boundaries, there'll be a vacuum there and you won't fill that. And I don't want to wait for you, but I'll just get busy over here in the broken cistern of yet another relationship that might seem good at the moment. Well, this person seems so good up front. I don't vet it. I don't give myself time. You're not doing enough, God, so I'll go to another possibly toxic relationship that feels good in the moment, right? And then I go on. I just love that verse, Joel, that the idea is I tell people, I want you to, in this time, I want you to feel, not fill. Do you hear that? The empty cup, that's that Greek word epithumia, a crucible, an empty cup for lust, for whatever. Temptation and loneliness feels the emptiness of the cup, but lust tries to fill it. Demand tries to fill it. And often we just need to be with God, and that emptiness that's like the manger at Christmas, to say, God, would you come be born? Bring him the emptiness and fill it, instead of you filling it on your own terms.
And I think if we were to do a little bit of like continually to peel out, to the very bottom, what we're describing is ultimately at the end of the day trust issues.
Come on, yeah.
It's a trust issue in Jeremiah 2:13, where water is the true necessity for life in the ancient world, and so to have a broken cistern or to not have a fountain of water is the equivalence to death. But Lysa, you said something that I think is really important, and one of the questions I've asked myself is, where's the object of my faith? What is the object of my faith? And I'm going to use a phrase that Jim just used, and it's simple, but it's not simplistic. We know that the object of our faith should be the Messiah, Jesus himself, and yet living that out in the midst of trust issues and relationships over long periods of time that were there and then all of a sudden they're not is much more difficult than just saying, hey, just put your faith in Jesus. Like we know that to be true, but living it out is different. And you were talking about desires, and here's one of the things that I'm becoming more, I'm trying to remind myself of, is that the desires are not wrong, typically.
Yeah.
Typically, the desires are not wrong. The challenge is we have a picture of what the destination is supposed to be and the means by which we're supposed to get to the destination. And Lisa's already said this. So then we attribute that to God, as if God has to be limited by meeting the desires of our heart by our means. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
A sovereign God works outside of our means. And so this is the place where trust and faith and an assurance of the goodness of God come into play, and an openness to maybe, just maybe, God will meet those desires, that the boundaries are going to actually demand that Romans 12:14, I think, or 17, if Paul says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, pursue peace, right? Yeah. So it's a conditional clause. If possible means that it might not be possible.
That's right.
And the condition to pursue peace might be you walking away from that relationship. Now, in the midst of the loss of that relationship, there is this place of trust that God may fill it in an uncanny way. We have to keep our eyes open to how God moves.
So good.
Love it.
So as we wrap up today's discussion, you may have a question. Okay, I see that boundaries are biblical. I see that there's a need in some of my relationships for boundaries, but I don't know how to communicate these boundaries. I want to recommend a resource that I've been working on for 2 years now. And Jim has walked me through this message. Joel has been right beside me in this message. Both of your fingerprints are all over it. There's even some therapeutic language that you bring to this message, but it's a new book I've written called Good Boundaries and Goodbyes. And this isn't a book about shoving people away. This isn't a book about piecing out or tapping out where we are supposed to be responsible in relationships. This is a book about learning to love others really well without losing the best of who we are. So it's called Good Boundaries and Goodbyes. And in this book, so much of what we've been talking about is folded into the various chapters, but also some of my favorite parts of the book. I provide a lot of scripts, ways for you to communicate your boundaries, and then ideas of also how to keep and maintain boundaries. And sometimes we need to establish a boundary, and then over time, if behaviors change, attitudes change, if responsibilities are increased, then we can lessen the boundary. But it also gives you an indication, when is it okay to do that and when is it not okay to do that. Plus, an amazing biblical theology of boundaries and a lot of verses that people take out of context and how to rightly better understand the verses that sometimes we misunderstand, which can be tripping points for healthy boundaries. So if that sounds like a book, a resource that could be helpful to you, it's called Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, and I'd love for you to pick up a copy. Joel and Jim, thank you so much for all this helpful wisdom today.
You bet.